Sucre Yara. If you tuned into the trailer that was posted last week, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, last week for this podcast, thank you so much, and that gave you a very basic idea of what will be going on. If you didn't, that's completely okay. And I'll say it again anyway, just in case. So, this podcast is a podcast that will be changing topics every year. So, for however long this podcast goes on, there will be that many topics to go over. This year is a Year of Stories podcast, which means I'll be reading books for you and putting in my own commentary. So, I think it's a good idea to get right into it. The first book I'll be reading is Roald Dahl's The Witches, illustrated by Quentin Blake. Whenever I start reading a book, I always read the back before I get into it. I just said get into it twice. That's sort of lame, but oh, also from the trailer it said that any bloopers will be kept in because I have no idea how to edit audio. Maybe I'll get better at that, but thus far, I think it's fun to have the bloopers kept in. It's sort of comedic. It's something you can laugh at along with me. So, the back of the book. This is not a fairy tale. This is about real witches. Grandmama loves to tell about witches. Real witches are the most dangerous of all living creatures on Earth. There's nothing they hate so much as children, and they work all kinds of terrifying spells to get rid of them. Her grandson listens closely to Grandmama's stories, but nothing can prepare him for the day he comes to face to face with the Grand High Witch herself. I know I just read this, like the back, but I almost forgot. Happy New Year's for those in America, like for whoever celebrates like New Year's, like not. I'm trying to be like culturally polite for Chinese New Year's. I could have just said Chinese New Year's. So, like, when that happens, I'll probably say Happy Chinese New Year, too. But anyway, Happy New Year. I can't believe it's 2022. Like, man, let's hope this year isn't as bad. And if it is, at least bring us the zombie apocalypse already. Jesus. Like, we don't need all this depressing, like, subplot. Just give us the apocalypse. That's what this is all leading up to. If it's gonna be that shitty, just give us that at the very least so we can have something fascinating going on instead of just a global pandemic. Anyway, the first page isn't like the first page of the story. It's just sort of like a prologue? Yeah, prologue. I know words. Hooray! Oh my gosh, I'm so proud of myself for knowing that. The Witches. This is not a fairy tale. This is about real witches. Real witches don't ride around on broomsticks. They don't even wear black cloaks and hats. They are vile, cunning, detestable creatures who disguise themselves as nice, ordinary ladies. So, like, some random bitch in a... Dang it, I need to not swear. Some random lady in a PTA meeting could just be leaving. She gets home, all the blinds are covered, and then just transforms into a witch, does a cackle, and is like, I don't even like them kids. Screw them kids. That would be sort of funny. I can't do voices that well, but if I could. So how can you tell you're face to face with one? Well, if you don't know yet, then you'd better find out quickly, because there's nothing a witch loathes more quite so much as children, and she'll wield all kinds of terrifying powers to get rid of them. This story will tell you all you need to know. You'll discover some sensational secrets. You'll witness spine-chilling and spectacular events. You'll also meet a true hero, a wonderful old grandmother, and the most gruesome, monstrous band of witches imaginable. Roald Dahl has done it again. Winner of the 1983 Whitbread Award, the judge's decision was unanimous. Funny, wise, deliciously disgusting, a real book for children. From the first paragraph to the last, we felt we were in the hands of a master. The Witches is tremendous, every bit as enjoyable as Roald Dahl's other puffins, which include Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, The Twits, Revolting Rhymes, and the BFG. The only other book of his that I can, like, distinctly remember reading from that list is the BFG. There's some other one that I remember, but I can't quite get the name of it. We'll find that later. We'll find that later in life. Wait. Oh, that was just the table of contents. Oh, dedicated to Licky. I still don't know how that's pronounced. It's Liccy. It's a sort of odd name. A note about witches. In fairy tales, witches always wear silly black hats and black cloaks, and they ride on broomsticks. What about the Wizard of Oz? What about the Good Witch? She floated down in a bubble. She wore white. Huh? You telling me that wasn't a fairy tale witch? What? Lying, Roald Dahl. Lying to your audience. But this is not a fairy tale. This is about real witches. The most important thing you should know about real witches is this. Listen very carefully. Never forget what is coming next. I forgot what is coming next. I read this as a child. I didn't remember. I ain't a child no more. I'm grown. I'm chilling. The most important thing you should know... Wait, I just read that. Oh my god. Real witches dress in ordinary clothes and look very much like ordinary women. They live in ordinary houses and they work in ordinary jobs. That is why they are so hard to catch. But like, can you imagine just like witch hunters? Like, what would you do once you catch them? They can still use their magic, right? So like, they could just turn you into a rat or something and peace out. Like, A real witch hates children with a red-hot, sizzling hatred that is more sizzling and red-hot than any hatred you could possibly imagine. I imagined a stove for the imagery of that. I don't know why. It just seemed fitting. Like, not like a gas stove. Like, I think I don't know what it's called, but it's like the ones where it has like the wire coil thing and it turns red when it, like, you turn it on. And it's getting hot, like that thing. If you know what that thing is, I need to know. I don't know how you tell me, actually. Maybe at some point in life. This is literally the only way I'm posting these. Like, we love not having social media. Oh, wait, we were reading. Hang on. We know what we're doing. A real witch spends all her time plotting to get rid of the children in her particular territory. Her passion is to do away with them, one by one. It is all she thinks about the whole day long. Even if she is working as a cashier in a supermarket, or typing letters for a businessman, or driving around in a fancy car. And she could be doing any of these things. Her mind will always be plotting and scheming and churning and burning and whizzing and fizzing with murderous, bloodthirsty thoughts. Like, can you imagine just working at your common desk job and you're like chilling, you're typing away, typing some sort of like letter or something? I don't know what you'd be doing at a desk job, sounds lame. And then you're just, man, I want to drop kick a child. Officer, I drop kicked that child in self-defense. That's a reference to something. I can't remember what. I think it's like a DSMP reference. I don't know. Anyway... Which child, she says to herself all day long, exactly which child shall I choose for my next squelching? Why do they call it a squelching? Like, that sounds so squish. And that I don't know. That seems so, like, a weird word to describe it with. I don't... I can't, like, describe it auditorially because I can't do the noises. And, like, I'm doing hand motions. I'm, like, clenching my fist to, like, make it seem like, ugh. But a real witch gets the same pleasure from squelching a child as you get from eating a plateful of strawberries and thick cream. Oh my god, berries and cream. Berries and cream, berries and cream. I'm a little lad who loves berries and cream. I'm so sorry. Oh my god. She reckons on doing away with one child a week. Anything less than that and she becomes grumpy. 1 child a week is 52 a year. Squish them and squiggle them and make them... Yes, that is a word. My favorite word is squish them and squiggle them and make them disappear. Yes. That is the motto of all wishes. Oh my god. Witches. Which is. Oh my god. Uh, can you imagine that as a business slogan? Like, calling all witches. One child a week is 52 a year. Squish them and squiggle them and make them disappear. What? Ma'am. Girlie. The children. Oh my gosh. You're like advertising that you're gonna be committing murder. We love that. We love a good old girl boss. God dang. Who just narrowly avoided swearing. Very carefully a victim is chosen, then the witch stalks the wretched child like a hunter stalking a little bird in the forest. She treads softly, she moves quietly, she gets closer and closer, then at last, when everything is ready, whist, and she swoops. Sparks fly, flames leap, oil boils, rats howl, skin shrivels, and the child disappears. A witch, you must understand, does not knock children on the head or stick knives into them or shoot at them with a pistol. Please know this is a children's book. Woo! We love children's books and this. Like, I shouldn't really be talking though, because modern day, we're getting like children's cartoons are addressing some dark things. Like, if you've seen Centaur World, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Owl House. What was. Amphibia. I just went slightly country for a moment there. Oh my goodness. I do recommend all three of those cartoons, so I enjoy them. Well, enjoyed Centaur World because that's done now. Two seasons and we done. We got a gay zebra centaur in there. Love Zulius. Zulius incredible. Anyway, people who do those things get caught by the police. A witch never gets caught. Don't forget that she has magic in her fingers and devilry dancing in her blood. She can make stones jump about like frogs, and she can make tongues of flame go flickering across the surface of the water. These magic powers are very frightening. Luckily, there are not a great number of real witches in the world today, but there are still quite enough to make you nervous. In England, there are probably about 100 of them altogether. Some countries have more, others have not quite so many. No country in the world is completely free from witches. A witch is always a woman. I do not wish to speak badly about women. Most women are lovely. Pause for commentary. Women are incredible. We love women in this household. Women. Anyway, yeah, I'm gay. I'm gay as heck. Heck yeah, women. Anyway. Oh my gosh. But the fact remains that all witches are women. There is no such thing as a male witch. On the other hand, a ghoul is always a male. So indeed is a Barghest. Both are dangerous, but neither of them is half as dangerous as a real witch. As far as children are concerned, a real witch is easily the most dangerous of all the living creatures on Earth. What makes her doubly dangerous is the fact that she doesn't look dangerous. Even when you know all the secrets, you will hear about those in a minute. You can still never be quite sure whether it is a witch you are gazing at or just a kind lady. If a tiger were able sorry. If a tiger were able to make himself look like a large dog with a waggy tail, it would probably go up and pat him on the head, and that would be the end of you. It is the same with witches. They all look like nice ladies. Every time I read that tiger line, instead of picturing the tiger, my brain just goes to like the witch just standing there in like human disguise, and some child going up and like patting her head or like trying to pat her head, and then she just chomps them like like I oh my gosh. Kindly examine the picture opposite. Which lady is the witch? Oh, I forgot to describe the picture. It's like a picture of two ladies. One either has white hair or blonde hair, the other has like a darker color of hair. Both have like pretty long noses. Their eyes are looking weird. They have long necks. One has a pearl necklace. One has like a diamond chain type thing. They both have pointy oobity woobities. I don't know why they're pointy. Why are they pointy? Who wants pointy oobity woobities? There used to be there used to be like bras that go out in a cone to like make them pointy. That's so weird. That was like I don't know why that was a fashion trend. I'm so glad that's gone. Please no one ever bring that back. No one. Unless you can pull it off. If you can pull it off, go for it. But gosh. Wow. That is a difficult question, but it is one that every child must try to answer. For all you know, a witch might be living next door to you right now. Possibly. Or she might be the woman with with the bright eyes who sat opposite you on the bus this morning. Jokes on this author, I don't ride the bus with grown women. 'Cause, dang. She might be the lady with the dazzling smile who offered you a sweet from a white paper bag in the street before lunch. If you're a child listening to this right now, do not take sweets from random ladies that look pretty. It could be drugged. We don't want drugged sweets. Like, don't take candy from strangers, especially if they're leading you to a white van for the sweets. We don't trust white vans in this household. Okay, good. We're clear on that. Nice, nice. She might even, and this will make you jump, she might even be your lovely school teacher who is reading these words to you at this very moment. I'm not a teacher, and you can't see me. Look carefully at that teacher. Perhaps she is smiling at the absurdity of such a suggestion. Don't let that put you off. It could be part of her cleverness. I am not, of course, telling you for 1 second that your teacher actually is a witch. All I am saying is that she might be one. It is most unlikely, and here comes the big but. I know if there are like pubescent boys, probably not, because like why would pubescent boys listen to books like that? I mean, they could. You never know. Don't snicker at that. Don't snicker at the big butt. I know you want to. We are mature. You can do it. It is not impossible. Oh, if only there were a way of telling for sure whether a woman was a witch or not. Then we could round them all up and put them in the meat grinder. Why the meat grinder? Are we gonna eat them? A nummy snack? Like, why not a fire? Why not a wood chipper? Why? What other weapons are there that like? Uh, why not like one of those clay roller things? Like the big ones, like silicone, like the silicone roller thingies. Like, why not those? Unhappily, there is no such way, but there are a number of little signals you can look out for. Little quirky habits that all witches have in common. And if you know about these, if you remember them always, then you might just possibly manage to escape from being squelched before you are very much older. Oh my gosh, witches are so quirky! Chapter 2 My Grandmother. I myself had 2 separate encounters with witches before I was 8 years old. That's some childhood trauma. From the first I escaped unharmed, but on the second occasion I was not so lucky. Things happened to me that will probably make you scream when you read about them. That can't be helped. The truth must be told. The fact that I am still here and able to speak to you, however peculiar I may look, is due entirely to my wonderful grandmother. My grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians know all about witches, for Norway, with its black forests and icy mountains, is where the first witches came from. My father and my mother were also Norwegian, but because my father had a business in England, I had been born there and had lived there and had started going to an English school. Twice a year, at Christmas and in the summer, we went back to Norway to visit my grandmother. This old lady, as far as I could gather, was just about the only surviving relative we had on either side of our family. She was my mother's mother, and I absolutely adored her. When she and I were together, we spoke in either Norwegian or in English. It didn't matter which. We were equally fluent in both languages, and I have to admit that I felt closer to her than to my mother. Soon after my 7th birthday, my parents took me, as usual, to spend Christmas with my grandmother in Norway. And it was over there while my father and mother and I were driving in icy weather just north of Oslo that our car skidded off the road and went tumbling down into a rocky ravine. My parents were killed. I told you there was childhood trauma. I was firmly strapped into the back seat and received only a cut on the forehead. I won't go into the horrors of that terrible afternoon. I still get the shivers when I think about it. I finished up, of course, back in my grandmother's house with her arms around me tight and both of us crying the whole night long. "What are we going to do now?" I asked her through tears. "You will stay here with me," she said, "and I will look after you." "Aren't I going back to England?" "No," she said, "I can never do that. Heaven shall take my soul, but Norway shall keep my bones." The very next day, in order that we might both try to forget our great sadness, my grandmother started telling me stories. She was a wonderful storyteller, and I was enthralled by everything she told me, but I didn't become really excited until she got onto the subject of witches. She was apparently a great expert on these creatures, and she made it very clear to me that her witch stories, unlike most of the others, were not imaginary tales. They were all true. They were the gospel truth. I think that Jeebus. Oh my gosh, the stammered way of getting to Jesus. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh boy. Da. They were history. Everything she was telling me about witches had actually happened, and I had better believe it. What was worse, what was far, far worse, was that witches were still with us. They were all around us, and I had better believe that, too. "Are you really being truthful, Grandmama? Really and truly truthful?" "My darling," she said, "you won't last long in this world if you don't know how to spot a witch when you see one." "But you told me that witches look like ordinary women, Grandmama, so how can I spot them?" "You must listen to me," my grandmother said. "You must remember everything I tell you. After that, all you can do is cross your hope and pray to heaven and hope for the best." We were in the living room of her house in Oslo, and I was ready for bed. The curtains were never drawn in that house, and through the windows I could see huge snowflakes falling slowly onto an outside world that was as black as tar. My grandmother was tremendously old and wrinkled, with a massive wide body which was smothered in grey lace. She sat there majestic in her armchair, filling every inch of it. Not even a mouse could have squeezed in to sit beside her. I myself, just 7 years old, was crouched on the floor at her feet, wearing pajamas, dressing gown, and slippers. "You swear you aren't pulling my leg?" I kept saying to her. "You swear you aren't just pretending?" "Listen," she said, "I have known no less than 5 children who have simply vanished off the face of this earth, never to be seen again. The witches took them." "I still think you're just trying to frighten me," I said. "I am trying to make sure you don't go the same way," she said. "I love you, and I want you to stay with me." "Tell me about the children who disappeared," I said. My grandmother was the only grandmother I ever met who smoked cigars. She lit one now, a long black cigar that smelt of burning rubber. "The first child I knew who disappeared," she said, "was called Ragnhild Hansen. Ragnhild Ragnhild was about 8 at the time, and she was playing with her little sister on the lawn. Their mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of air. "Where's Ragnhild?" she asked. "She went away with the tall lady," the little sister said. "What tall lady?" the mother said. "The tall lady in white gloves," the little sister said. "She took Ragnhild by the hand and led her away." No one, my grandmother said, ever saw Ragnhild again. "Didn't they search for her?" I asked. "They searched for miles around. Everyone in the town helped, but they never found her." "What happened to the other 4 children?" I asked. "They vanished just as Ragnhild did." "How, Grandmamma? How did they vanish?" "In every single case, a strange lady was seen outside the house just before it happened." "But how did they vanish?" I asked. "The second one was very peculiar," my grandmother said. "There was a family called Christensen. Yeah, Christensen. They lived up on Holmenkollen, and they had an old oil painting in the living room, which they were very proud of. The painting showed some ducks in the yard outside a farmhouse. There were no people in the painting, just a flock of ducks on a grassy farmyard and the farmhouse in the background. It was a large painting and rather pretty. Well, one day their daughter Solveig? I think it's Solveig? Yeah, let's go with that. My throat is going away, and I've only been recording for 25 minutes. Wow. We gotta get into it, yo. One day, their daughter Solveig came home from school eating an apple. She said a nice lady had given it to her on the street. What did we say, kids? Don't take snacks from strangers. Don't take snacks from strangers. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. The next morning, little Solveig was not in her bed. The parents searched everywhere, but they couldn't find her. Then all of a sudden, her father shouted, "There she is! That's Solveig feeding the ducks!" He was pointing at the oil painting, and sure enough, Solveig was in it. She was standing in the farmyard in the act of throwing bread to the ducks out of a basket. The father rushed up to the painting and touched her, but that didn't help. She was simply a part of the painting, just a picture painted on the canvas. That was such a loud cough. My apologies. Oh my goodness. Did you ever see that painting, Grandmama, with a little girl in it? Many times, my grandmother said, and the peculiar thing was that little Soleil kept changing her position in the picture. One day she would actually be inside the farmhouse and you could see her face looking out of the window. Another day she would be far over to the left with a duck in her arms. Did you see her moving in the picture, Grandmama? Nobody did. Wherever she was, whether outside feeding the ducks or inside looking out of the window, she was always motionless, just a figure painted in oils. It was all very odd, my grandmother said. Very odd indeed. And what was most odd of all was that as the years went by, she kept growing older in the picture. In 10 years, the small girl had become a young woman. In 30 years, she was middle-aged. Then, all at once, 54 years after it all happened, she disappeared from the picture altogether. You mean she died? I said. Who knows, my grandmother said. Some very mysterious things go on in the world of witches. That's two you've told me about, I said. What happened to the third one? The third one was little Birgit Svensson, my grandmother said. She lived just across the road from us. One day she started growing feathers all over her body. Within a month she had turned into a large white chicken. Her parents kept her for years in a pen in the garden. She even laid eggs. What color eggs? Brown ones. What color eggs? I said. Brown ones, my grandmother said. Biggest eggs I've ever seen in my life. Her mother made omelets out of them. Delicious they were. Who the hell finna make omelets out of their chicken daughter's eggs? That sounds sort of messed up, okay? Am I the only one thinking that? I better not be the only one thinking that. Oh my goodness gracious. Those could be your chicken grandchildren. And you're making omelets? Fuck off, bestie. I almost swore I need to stop swearing. Oh my gosh. I gazed up at my grandmother, who sat there like some ancient queen on her throne. Her eyes were misty gray, and they seemed to be looking at something many miles away. The cigar was the only real thing about her at that moment, and the smoke it made billowed round her head in blue clouds. But the little girl who became a chicken didn't disappear? I said. No, not forget. She lived on for many years, laying her brown eggs. You said all of them disappeared. I made a mistake, my grandmother said. I am getting old. I can't remember everything. What happened to the fourth child? I asked. The fourth was a boy called Harold. All these names were so built different, and then just we get Harold. My grandmother said. One morning his skin went all grayish yellow, then it became hard and crackly, like the shell of a nut. By evening the boy had turned to stone. Stone? I said. You mean real stone? Granite, she said. I'll take you to see him if you like. They still keep him in the house. He stands in the hall, a little stone statue. Visitors lean their umbrellas up against him. Although I was not very young, I was not prepared to believe everything my grandmother told me, and yet she spoke with such conviction, with such utter seriousness, and with never a smile on her face or a twinkle in her eye, that I found myself beginning to wonder. Go on, Grandmama, I said. You told me there were 5 altogether. What happened to the last one? Would you like a puff of my cigar? She said. I'm only 7, Grandmama. I don't care what age you are, she said. You'll never catch a cold if you smoke cigars. What about number 5, Grandmama? Number 5, she said, chewing the end of her cigar as though it were delicious asparagus, was rather an interesting case. A 9-year-old boy called Leif was summer holidaying with his family on the fjord, and the whole family was picnicking and swimming off some rocks on one of those little islands. Young Leif dived into the water, and his father, who was watching him, noticed that he stayed under for an unusually long time. When he came to the surface at last, he wasn't Leif anymore. What was he, Grandmama? He was a porpoise. He wasn't. Well, he couldn't have been. He was a lovely young porpoise, she said, and as friendly as could be. Grandmama, I said. Yes, my darling? Did he really and truly turn into a porpoise? Absolutely, she said. I knew his mother well. She told me all about it. She told me how Leif the porpoise stayed with them all that afternoon, giving his brothers and sisters rides on his back. They had a wonderful time. Then he waved a flipper at them and swam away, never to be seen again. But Grandmama, I said, how did they know that the porpoise was actually Leif? He talked to them, my grandmother said. He laughed and joked with them all the time he was giving them rides. But wasn't there a tremendous fuss when this happened? Not much, my grandmother said. You must remember that here in Norway we are used to that sort of thing. There are witches everywhere. There's probably one living in our street in this very moment. It's time you went to bed. A witch wouldn't come in through my window in the night, would she? I said, quaking a little. No, my grandmother said. A witch will never do silly things like climbing up drain pipes or breaking into people's houses. You'll be quite safe in your bed. Come along, I'll tuck you in. How to Recognize a Witch. Chapter 3. The next evening, after my grandmother had given me my bath, she took me once again into the living room for another story. Yo, Grandma's giving you baths? As a 7-year-old? I was taking showers as a 7-year-old. Oh my gosh. Tonight, the old woman said, I am going to tell you how to recognize a witch when you see one. Can you always be sure? I asked. No, she said, you can't, and that's the trouble, but you can make a pretty good guess. She was dropping cigar ash all over her lap, and I hoped she wasn't going to catch on fire before she told me how to recognize a witch. Before she told me how to recognize a witch. Wouldn't you want your grandma not to set on fire in general? Like, oh no, my grandma's on fire. And she didn't get to tell me how to spot a witch. After she tells you how to spot a witch, oh no, my grandma's on fire. At least she told me how to spot a witch. All shall be well. No, it won't. No, the heck it won't. Put your grandma out. That sentence with no context, just put your grandma out. Oh man. Whew. I love that quote from myself. I hate myself, but I also love myself in this moment. Put your grandma out. Oh. I'm sorry, I just heard music start playing downstairs, so like that was the silence. It's just because I'm just sitting here and then it's like bum ba dum, ba da da dum, ba da 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 dum, ba dum ba dum. In the first place, she said, a real witch is certain always to be wearing gloves when you meet her. Surely not always, I said. What about in the summer when it's hot? Even in the summer, my grandmother said. She has to. Do you want to know why? Why, I said. Because she doesn't have fingernails. Instead of fingernails, she has thin, curvy claws like a cat, and she wears the gloves to hide them. Mind you, lots of very respectable women wear gloves, especially in winter, so this doesn't help you very much. Mama used to wear gloves, I said. Not in the house, my grandmother said. Witches wear gloves even in the house. They only take them off when they go to bed. How do you know all this, Grandmama? Don't interrupt, she said. Just take it all in. The second thing to remember is that a real witch is always bald. Bald? I said. Bald as a boiled egg, my grandmother said. I was shocked. There was something indecent about a bald woman. There was something indecent about a bald woman. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but what's indecent about a bald woman? They can't control it. Like, sometimes they can't, sometimes they can. There's nothing wrong with having, like, short hair and no hair as a woman. Goddamn. Dang it, I swore. Oh, I'm sorry, random children, if you're listening. Don't repeat me. Don't repeat my words. Uh, why are they bald, Grandmama? Don't ask me why, she snapped. But you can take it from me that not a single hair grows on a witch's head. How horrid! Disgusting, my grandmother said. If she's bald, she'll be easy to spot, I said. Not at all, my grandmother said. A real witch always wears a wig to hide her baldness. She wears a first-class wig, and it is almost impossible to tell a really first-class wig from ordinary hair, unless you give it a pull to see if it comes off. Then that's what I'll have to do, I said. Don't be foolish, my grandmother said. You can't go round pulling at the hair of every lady you meet, even if she is wearing gloves. Just you try it and see what happens. So that doesn't help much either. None of these things is any good on its own, my grandmother said. It's only when you put them all together that they begin to make a little sense. Mind you, my grandmother went on. These wigs do cause a rather serious problem for witches. What problem, Grandmama? They make the scalp itch most terribly, she said. You see, when an actress wears a wig, or if you or I were to wear a wig, we would be putting it on over our own hair. But a witch has to put it straight onto her naked scalp, and the underneath of a wig is always very rough and scratchy. It sets up a frightful itch on the bald skin. It causes nasty sores on the head, wig rash, the witches call it, and it doesn't half itch. What other things must I look for to recognize a witch? I asked. Look for the nose holes, my grandmother said. Witches have slightly larger nose holes than ordinary people. The rim of each nose hole is pink and curvy, like the rim of a certain kind of seashell. Why do they have such big nose holes? I asked. For smelling with, my grandmother said. A real witch has the most amazing powers of smell. She can actually smell out a child who is standing on the other side of the street on a pitch-black night. She couldn't smell me, I said. I've just had a bath. Oh, yes, she could, my grandmother said. The cleaner you are, the more smelly you are to a witch. That can't be true, I said. An absolutely clean child gives off the most ghastly stench to a witch. My grandmother said. The dirtier you are, the less you smell. But that doesn't make sense, Grandmama. Oh, yes, it does, my grandmother said. It isn't the dirt that the witch is smelling, it is you. The smell that drives a witch mad actually comes right out of your own skin. It comes oozing out of your skin in waves, and these waves, stink waves, the witches call them, go floating through the air and hit the witch right smack in her nostrils. They send her reeling. Now wait a minute, Grandmama. Don't interrupt, she said. The point is this. When you haven't washed for a week and your skin is all covered over with dirt, then quite obviously the stink waves cannot come oozing out nearly so strongly. I shall never have a bath again, I said. Just don't have one too often, my grandmother said. Once a month is quite enough for a sensible child. Once a month? Please don't take this book seriously. Oh my god, I don't want to be encouraging a bunch of children to be stinking around. Your parents probably wouldn't even let you, but don't do it. Don't be stinking. Don't be stinky. Oh my god. Once a month. Jesus. It was at moments like these that I loved my grandmother more than ever. Grandmama, I said, if it's a dark night, how can a witch smell the difference between a child and a grown-up? Because grown-ups don't give out stink waves, she said. Only children do that. But I don't really give out stink waves, do I? I said. I'm not giving them out this very moment, am I? Not to me you aren't, my grandmother said. To me you are smelling like raspberries and cream. Berries and cream! Oh my god, why do they do this to me? But to a witch you would be smelling absolutely disgusting. What would I be smelling of? I asked. Dog's droppings, my grandmother said. I reeled. I was stunned. Dog's droppings? I cried. I am not smelling of dog's droppings. I don't believe it. I won't believe it. What's more, my grandmother said, speaking with a touch of relish, to a witch you'd be smelling of fresh dog's droppings. That simply is not true, I cried. I know I am not smelling of dog's droppings, stale or fresh. Lo siento, lo siento. Oh my gosh. I can't. There's no point in arguing about it, my grandmother said. It's a fact of life. I was outraged. I simply couldn't bring myself to believe that what my grandmother was telling me. So if you see a woman holding her nose as she passes you in the street, she went on, that woman could easily be a witch. I decided to change the subject. Tell me what else to look for in a witch, I said. The eyes, my grandmother said. Look carefully at the eyes, because the eyes of a real witch are different from yours and mine. Look in the middle of each eye where there is normally a little black dot. If she is a witch, the black dot will keep changing color, and you will see fire and you will see ice dancing right in the very center of the colored dot. It will send shivers running all over your skin. My grandmother leant back in her chair and sucked away contentedly at her foul black cigar. I squatted on the floor, staring up at her, fascinated. She was not smiling. She looked deadly serious. Are there other things? I asked her. Of course there are other things, my grandmother said. You don't seem to understand that witches are not actually women at all. They look like women, they talk like women, and they are able to act like women. But in actual fact, they are totally different animals. They are demons and human shaped. That is why they have claws and bald heads and queer noses and peculiar eyes, all of which they have to conceal as best they can from the rest of the world. What else is different about them, Grandmama? The feet, she said. Witches never have toes. No toes! I cried. Then what do they have? They just have feet, my grandmother said. The feet have square ends with no toes on them at all. Does that make it difficult to walk? I asked. Not at all, my grandmother said, but it does give them a problem to wear with their shoes. All ladies like to wear small, rather pointed shoes, but a witch whose feet are very wide and square at the ends has the most awful job squeezing her feet into those neat little pointed shoes. Why doesn't she wear wide, comfy shoes with square ends? I asked. She dare not, my grandmother said. Just as she hides her baldness with a wig, she must also hide her ugly witch's feet by squeezing them into pretty shoes. Isn't that terribly uncomfortable? I said. Extremely uncomfortable, my grandmother said, but she has to put up with it. These are women's beauty standards. Oh my gosh. Ayo. If she's wearing ordinary shoes, it won't help me to recognize her, will it, Grandmama? I'm afraid it won't, my grandmother said. You might possibly see her limping very slightly, but only if you were watching closely. Are those the only differences then, Grandmama? There's one more, my grandmother said. Just one more. What is it, Grandmama? Their spit is blue. Blue? I cried. Not blue. Their spit can't be blue. Blue as a bilberry, she said. You don't mean it, Grandmama. Nobody can have blue spit. Witches can, she said. Is it like ink? I asked. Exactly, she said. They even use it to write with. They use those old-fashioned pens that have nibs, and they simply lick the nib. Can you notice the blue spit, Grandma? If a witch was talking to me, would I be able to notice it? Only if you looked very carefully, my grandmother said. If you looked very carefully, you would probably see a slight bluish tinge on her teeth, but it doesn't show much. It would if she spat, I said. Witches never spit, my grandmother said. They daren't. I couldn't believe my grandmother would be lying to me. She went to church every morning of the week, and she said grace before every meal, and somebody who did that would never tell lies. I was beginning to believe every word she spoke. So there you are, my grandmother said. That's about all I can tell you. None of it is very helpful. You can still never be absolutely sure whether a woman is a witch or not just by looking at her. But if she is wearing the gloves, if she has the large nose holes, the queer eyes, and the hair that looks as though it might be a wig, and if she has a bluish tinge on her teeth, if she has all of these things, then you run like mad. Grandmama, I said, when you were a little girl, did you ever meet a witch? Once, my grandmother said. Only once. What happened? I'm not going to tell you, she said. It would frighten you out of your skin and give you bad dreams. Please tell me, I begged. No, she said. Certain things are too horrible to talk about. Does it have something to do with your missing thumb? I asked. Suddenly, her old wrinkled lips shut tight as a pair of tongs, and the hand that held the cigar, which had no thumb of it, began to quiver very slightly. Bro, you don't bring up a man's trauma like that. Oh my gosh. I get that you're a 7-year-old. I get that you want to be safe. But oh my goodness gracious, you can't just bring up your granny's missing thumb. I waited. She didn't look at me. She didn't speak. All of a sudden, she had shut herself off completely. The conversation was finished. Good night, Grandmama, I said, rising from the floor and kissing her on the cheek. She didn't move. I crept out of the room and went to my bedroom. Yeah, as you should. You just upset your granny. Oh my gosh. Like, come on, man. Like, if that was your granny, and like witches were real in this world, like these kind of witches, we were talking about that with your granny, and your granny's trying to protect you, and she's like, I don't want to talk about the time that I encountered a witch, and you're like, hey yo, does it have anything to do with that missing thumb of yours? You don't say that. Oh my gosh. The Grand High Witch. The next day, a man in a black suit arrived at the house carrying a briefcase, and he held a long conversation with my grandmother in the living room. I was not allowed in while he was there, but when at last he went away, my grandmother came in to me, walking very slowly and looking very sad. That man was reading me your father's will, she said. What is a will? I asked her. It is something you write before you die, she said, and in it you say who is going to have your money and your property. But most important of all, it says who is going to look after your child if both the mother and father are dead. A fearful panic took hold of me. It did say you, Grandmama, I cried. I don't have to go to somebody else, do I? No, she said. Your father would never have done that. He has asked me to take care of you for as long as I live, but he has also asked that I take you back to your own house in England. He wants us to stay there. But why? I said. Why can't we stay here in Norway? You would hate to live anywhere else. You told me you would. I know, she said, but there are a lot of complications with money and with the house that you wouldn't understand. Also, it's said in the will that although all your family is Norwegian, you were born in England and you have started your education there, and he wants you to continue going to English schools. Oh, Grandmama, I cried, you don't want to go and live in our English house. I know you don't. Of course I don't, she said, but I am afraid I must. The will said that your mother felt the same way about it, and it is important to respect the wishes of the parents. There was no way out of it. We had to go to England, and my grandmother started making arrangements at once. Your next school term begins in a few days, she said, so we don't have any time to waste. On the evening before we left for England, my grandmother got on to her favorite subject once again. There are not as many witches in England as there are in Norway, she said. I'm sure I won't meet one, I said. I sincerely hope you won't, she said. Oh, I said, she said. That's. Oh my god. Oh no. Oh no. Anyway, I sincerely hope you won't, she said, because those English witches are probably the most vicious in the world. Blimey, mate, a child. I'm sorry, British people, for the mockery of your accent. Oh my gosh. As she sat there smoking her foul cigar and talking away, I kept looking at the hand with the missing thumb. I couldn't help it. I was fascinated by it, and I kept wondering what awful thing had happened that time when she had met a witch. It must have been something absolutely appalling and gruesome, otherwise she would have told me about it. Maybe the thumb had been twisted off, or perhaps she had been forced to jam her thumb down the spout of a boiling kettle until it was steamed away. Or did someone pull it out of her hand like a tooth? I couldn't help trying to guess. Tell me what those English witches do, Grandmama, I said. Well, she said, sucking away at her stinking cigar, their favorite ruse is to mix up a powder that will turn a child into some creature or other that all grown-ups hate. What sort of creature, Grandmama? Often it's a slug, she said. A slug is one of their favorites. Then the grown-ups step on the slug, and squish it without knowing it's a child. That's perfectly beastly, I cried. Or it might be a flea, my grandmother said. They might turn you into a flea, and without realizing what she was doing, your own mother would get out the flea powder, and then it's goodbye you. You're making me nervous, Grandmama. I don't think I want to go back to England. I've known English witches, she went on, who have turned children into pheasants and then sneaked the pheasants up into the woods the very day before the pheasant shooting season opened. Ouch, I said. Do they get shot? Of course they get shot. Oh, so they get shot, she said, and then they get plucked and roasted and eaten for supper. I pictured myself as a pheasant flying frantically over the men with the guns, swerving and dipping as the guns exploded below me. Yes, my grandmother said. It gives the English witches great pleasure to stand back and watch the grown-ups doing away with their own children. I really don't want to go to England, Grandmama. Of course you don't, she said. Nor do I, but I'm afraid we've got to. Are witches different in every country? I asked. Completely different, my grandmother said. But I don't know how much of the other countries. But I don't know much about the other countries. Don't you even know about America? I asked. Not really, she answered. Although I have heard it said that over there the witches are able to make the grown-ups eat their own children. I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked, America. Oh my goodness. Never, I cried. Oh no, Grandmama, that couldn't be true. I don't know whether it's true or not, she said. It's only a rumor I've heard. But how could they possibly make them eat their own children? I asked. By turning them into hot dogs, she said. That wouldn't be too difficult for a clever witch. Does every single country in the world have its witches? I asked. Wherever you find people, you find witches, my grandmother said. There is a secret society of witches in every country. Do they all know each other? Know one another, Grandmama? They do not, she said. A witch only knows the witches in her own country. She is strictly forbidden to communicate with any foreign witches, but an English witch, for example, will know all the other witches in England. They are all friends. They ring each other up. They swap deadly recipes. Goodness knows what else they talk about. I hate to think. I sat on the floor, watching my grandmother put her cigar stub in the ashtray and folded her hands across her stomach. Once a year, she went on, the witches of each separate country hold their own secret meeting. They all get together in one place to receive a lecture from the Grand High Witch of all the world. From who? I cried. She is the ruler of them all, my grandmother said. She is all powerful. She is without mercy. All other witches are petrified of her. They see her only once a year at their annual meeting. She goes there to whip up excitement and enthusiasm and to give orders. The Grand High Witch travels from country to country attending these annual meetings. Where do they have these meetings, Grandmama? There are all sorts of rumors, my grandmother answered. I have heard it said that they just book into a hotel. I don't get that grammar. I'm sorry. They just book into a hotel like any other group of women who are holding a meeting. I have also heard it said that some very peculiar things go on in the hotels they stay in. It's rumored that the beds are never slept in, that there are burn marks on the bedroom carpets, that toes are discovered in the bathtubs, and that down in the kitchen the cook once found a baby crocodile swimming in a saucepan of soup. Good soup. Good soup. Do. My grandmother picked up her cigar and took another puff, inhaling the foul smoke deeply into her lungs. Where does the Grand High Witch live when she's at home? I asked. Nobody knows, my grandmother said. If we knew that, then she could be rooted out and destroyed. Witchophiles all over the world have spent their lives trying to discover the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch. What is a witchophile, Grandmama? A person who studies witches and knows a lot about them, my grandmother said. Are you a witchophile, Grandmama? I'm sorry for snickering and pausing. If you know, you know. I am a retired witchophile, she said. I am too old to be active any longer, but when I was younger, I traveled all over the globe trying to track down the Grand High Witch. I never came even close to succeeding. Is she rich? I asked. She's rolling, my grandmother said, simply rolling in money. Rumor has it that there is a machine in her headquarters which is exactly like the machine the government uses to print the banknotes you and I use. After all, banknotes are only bits of paper with special designs and pictures on them. Anyone can make them who has the right machine and the right paper. My guess is my guess is that the Grand High Witch makes all the paper she wants and dishes it out to witches everywhere. What about foreign money? I asked. Those machines can make Chinese money if you want them to, my grandmother said. It's only a question of pressing the right button. That's not how money works, y'all. Just so you know, money is weird. But Grandmama, I said, if nobody has ever seen the Grand High Witch, how can you be so sure she exists? My grandmother gave me a long and very severe look. Nobody has ever seen the devil, she said, but we know he exists. The next morning we sailed for England, and soon I was back in the old family house in Kent, but this time with only my grandmother to look after me. Then the Easter term began, and every weekday I went to school, and everything seemed to have come back to normal again. Now at the bottom of our garden there was an enormous conker tree, and high up in its branches Timmy, my best friend, and I had started to work on a magnificent tree house. We were able to work on it only at the weekends, but we were getting along fine. We had begun with the floor, which we built by laying wide planks between two quite far apart branches and nailing them down. Within a month, we had finished the floor. Then we constructed a wooden railing around the floor, and that left only the roof to build. The roof was the difficult bit. One Saturday afternoon, when Timmy was in bed with the flu, I decided to make a start on the roof all by myself. It was lovely being high up there in that conker tree, all alone with the pale young leaves coming out everywhere around me. It was like being in a big green cave, and the height made it extra exciting. My grandmother had told me that if I fell, I would break a leg, and every time I looked down, I got a tingle along my spine. I worked away, nailing the first plank on the roof. Then suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a woman standing immediately below me. She was looking up at me and smiling in the most peculiar way. When most people smile, their lips go out sideways. This woman's lips went upwards and downwards, showing all her front teeth and gums. The gums were like raw meat. It is always a shock to discover that you are being watched when you think you are alone. And what was the strange woman doing in our garden anyway? I noticed that she was wearing a small black hat, and she had black gloves on her elbows, and the gloves came nearly up to her elbows. Gloves! She was wearing gloves! I froze all over. I have a present for you, she said, still staring at me, still smiling, still showing her teeth and gums. I didn't answer. Come down out of that tree, little boy, she said, and I shall give you the most exciting present you've ever seen. No, you ever had. Her voice had a curious rasping quality. It made a sort of metallic sound as though her throat was full of drawing pins. Without taking her eyes from my face, she very slowly put one of those gloved hands into her purse and drew out a small green snake. She held it up for me to see. It's tame, she said. The snake began to coil itself around her forearm. It was brilliant green. If you come down here, I shall give him to you, she said. Oh, Grandmama, I thought. Come and help me. Then I panicked. I dropped the hammer and shot up that enormous tree like a monkey. I didn't stop until I was as high as I could possibly go, and there I stayed, quivering with fear. I couldn't see the woman now. There were layers and layers of leaves between her and me. Oh, sorry. I stayed up there for hours, and I kept very still. It began to grow dark. At last I heard my grandmother calling my name. I'm up here, I shouted back. Come down at once, she called out. It's past your supper time. Grandmama, I shouted, has that woman gone? What woman? My grandmother called back. The woman in the black gloves. There was silence from below. It was the silence of somebody who was too stunned to speak. I'm so sorry. I said that, and then I thought of the audio. The woman was too stunned to speak. Grandmama, I shouted again. Has she gone? Yes, my grandmother answered at last. She's gone. I'm here, my darling. I'll look after you. You can come down now. I climbed down. I was trembling. I was trembling. There we are. My grandmother enfolded me in her arms. I've seen a witch, I said. Come inside, she said. You'll be all right with me. She led me into the house and gave me a cup of hot cocoa with lots of sugar in it. Tell me everything, she said. I told her. By the time I had finished, it was my grandmother who was trembling. Her face was ashy gray, and I saw her glance down at that hand of hers that didn't have a thumb. You know what this means, she said. It means that there is one of them in our district. From now on, I'm not letting you walk alone to school. Do you think she could be after me specially? I asked. No, she said, I doubt that. One child is as good as any to those creatures. It is it is hardly surprising that after that I became a very witch-conscious little boy. If I happened to be alone on the road and saw a woman approaching who was wearing gloves, I would quickly skip across to the other side. And as the weather remained pretty cold during the whole of that month, nearly everybody was wearing gloves. Curiously enough, I never saw the woman with the green snake again. That was my first switch, but it wasn't my last. I think that's a good place for us to stop for today, or for our first episode. My throat is so sore, so I need to hydrate. Oh my goodness, I need to remember to have water when I do these. Whew. But thank you for tuning in. I hope you're excited to have more. I might post either next Saturday or maybe Tuesday. Depends on how I'm feeling and how much I want to continue with the book. So, thank you so much for listening, and I can't wait to not see you, but interact with you next time. Bye-bye.